Picture this. A single man, born a minor prince in a forgotten Persian province, topples the greatest empire in Western Asia. In the year 224 AD, on the plains of Hormozdgan, the fate of an entire civilization hangs in the balance. The Parthian Empire, rulers of Iran for nearly 5 centuries, faces extinction. Their executioner? Ardashir I, a rebel king who would not only destroy an empire, but resurrect another from the ashes of history. This is not merely a story of military conquest. This is the rebirth of Persia itself, and the blood spilled on this battlefield would echo across 7 centuries, shaping the destiny of the Middle East and challenging the might of Rome. To understand Ardashir's revolution, we must first grasp what he was overthrowing. The Parthian Empire, established around 247 BC, stretched from the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq to the eastern borders of present-day Afghanistan. For nearly half a millennium, the Sasanian dynasty had ruled this vast territory through a feudal system of semi-autonomous kingdoms, each governed by powerful noble families who owed nominal allegiance to the Parthian king of kings. By the early 3rd century AD, this system had become the empire's fatal weakness. The Sassanid monarchs had grown militarily impotent, their authority eroded by constant civil wars between rival claimants and the increasingly independent actions of their vassal kings. The most recent ruler, Ardashir IV, had spent much of his reign battling his own brother Vologases VI for control of the fractured realm. Into this chaos stepped Ardashir, son of Papak, a minor king ruling the province of Persis in southwestern Iran, the ancestral heartland of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that had fallen to Alexander the Great 5 centuries earlier. Ardashir was no ordinary provincial governor. He was a descendant of Sasan, a guardian at the fire temple of Anahita in Istakhr, and through carefully constructed genealogy, he claimed direct descent from the Achaemenids themselves. Around 208 AD, Ardashir began his rebellion not with grand proclamations, but through calculated regional consolidation. He eliminated rival local rulers, absorbed their territories, and transformed Persis from a backwater province into a militarized kingdom. His official coronation as king of Persis around 210 AD was a direct challenge to Parthian authority. When Ardashir began minting coins bearing his own image with the title King of Kings, a title reserved exclusively for the Parthian emperor, he declared war not just on Ardashir IV, but on the entire Sassanid order. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Ardashir was not merely seeking independence. He was positioning himself as the legitimate heir to ancient Persian glory, promising to restore centralized imperial authority and revive Zoroastrianism as a unifying state religion. For nearly 15 years, he waged a systematic campaign across Iran, defeating Parthian armies and absorbing vassal kingdoms. By 224 AD, all that remained was a final confrontation with Ardashir himself. The armies that converged on the plain of Hormozdgan in 224 AD represented 2 fundamentally different military philosophies. Ardashir IV commanded the traditional Parthian force, approximately 50,000 warriors according to estimates derived from later sources. His army was the product of feudal obligation, heavily armored cataphract cavalry provided by noble families, supplemented by mounted archers whose ancestors had tormented Roman legions for generations. The Parthian military system was renowned for its tactical mobility and the devastating Parthian shot, the ability of horse archers to turn in the saddle and fire arrows while retreating. But this formidable reputation concealed structural weakness. The Parthian army was not a unified professional force, but a confederation of private armies led by nobles whose loyalty to Ardashir was questionable at best. Many resented the emperor's losses against Rome in recent decades. Others had blood ties to rival claimants. The army that Ardashir led was powerful on paper but brittle in cohesion. Ardashir's force, estimated at 30,000 to 40,000 men, was fundamentally different. He had spent 15 years forging a centralized military machine loyal to him personally, not to abstract feudal obligations. His corps consisted of Persian cavalry from Fars province, supplemented by infantry drawn from the mountainous regions of southern Iran. Ardashir had studied his enemy carefully. He understood that Parthian tactics depended on mobility and dispersed formations that played to the independence of individual noble commanders. The location itself favored a decisive engagement. The plains of Hormozdgan, in the region between modern-day Shiraz and the Persian Gulf, offered open terrain ideal for cavalry operations. Neither side could avoid battle. Artabanus needed to crush this rebellion before more vassal kings defected, while Ardashir required a decisive military victory to legitimize his claim as king of kings. According to later Sasanian royal inscriptions and accounts preserved by historians such as Al-Tabari, Ardashir implemented a deliberate strategy. He positioned his most reliable units in the center, creating a solid anchor for his line. His wings were strengthened with cavalry capable of executing disciplined maneuvers. Unlike the Parthian preference for fluid, harassing tactics, Ardashir planned for direct engagement, a slugging match that would test discipline and morale rather than noble cavalry's individual prowess. Artabanus, confident in his numerical advantage and the legendary reputation of Parthian arms, apparently expected a traditional engagement where his superior numbers and experienced cataphracts would overwhelm the rebel force. What he failed to recognize was that he was not facing a typical provincial uprising, but a revolutionary movement backed by ideological fervor and military professionalism that the Parthian system could no longer match. When dawn broke over Hormozdgan on that fateful day in April 224 AD, two visions of Iran faced each other across the plain. The Parthian standards fluttered above the assembled nobility of an empire 5 centuries old. Opposite them stood the banners of resurgent Persia, carried by men who believed they were not rebels but liberators, restoring their homeland to its rightful glory. The battle commenced with the traditional Parthian opening, waves of horse archers surging forward, releasing clouds of arrows designed to provoke enemy formations into breaking ranks and pursuing. For generations, this tactic had devastated opponents from Roman legionaries to Eastern nomads. But Ardashir's troops held formation. His infantry, protected by large shields, absorbed the arrow storm with disciplined patience. His cavalry remained in position, refusing the bait. Frustrated by this unexpected resistance, the Parthian nobles committed their cataphracts, the heavily armored shock cavalry that formed the elite core of their military tradition. These were warriors encased in scale armor, riding horses similarly protected, wielding long lances designed to shatter infantry formations. The thunder of their charge must have shaken the earth itself. Yet Ardashir had prepared for precisely this moment. His central infantry formations opened controlled gaps, allowing the cataphract charge to penetrate without achieving the devastating impact of a solid collision. Simultaneously, his disciplined cavalry wings wheeled inward, attacking the flanks of the Parthian charge. What should have been a decisive breakthrough became a chaotic melee fought at close quarters, where Parthian tactical mobility meant nothing, and individual noble commanders lost their ability to coordinate. The fighting devolved into a grinding attritional struggle. Ardashir had correctly identified his enemy's critical weakness. The Parthian army could not sustain prolonged, organized combat once its initial tactical maneuvers failed. The feudal structure that had allowed the Arsacid dynasty to rule vast territories through delegated authority became a fatal liability when centralized command and sustained discipline were required. As the battle raged into its second hour, the Parthian line began showing signs of strain. Minor nobles, watching their retainers cut down in a battle that was not unfolding according to expected patterns, started calculating personal survival over dynastic loyalty. Small contingents began withdrawing from the flanks, not in outright flight but in the ambiguous repositioning that preserved honor while abandoning the fight. Artabanus IV himself recognized the danger. In a desperate attempt to reverse the battle's momentum and rally his fragmenting forces, the Parthian king of kings did what military protocol demanded of ancient monarchs. He committed himself personally to the fighting. Sources describe him entering the melee with his bodyguard, seeking either glorious victory or honorable death. Ardashir, commanding from a position where he could observe the entire battlefield, saw the Parthian emperor's banner pushing into the chaos. He made his own calculated gamble. Rather than maintaining defensive posture, he led his household cavalry in a direct thrust toward Artabanus's position. This was not reckless heroism, but ruthless strategic calculation. If Artabanus fell, the Parthian army, already wavering, would disintegrate completely. The two kings met in combat. The specifics of their personal duel have been embellished by later Sasanian propaganda, but the outcome is historical fact. Artabanus IV died on that battlefield. Whether he fell directly to Ardashir's own hand or was killed by the rebel king's guards is ultimately irrelevant. The symbolism was complete. The last Parthian king of kings perished fighting a descendant of the Achaemenids, and with him died the Arsacid dynasty. The death of Artabanus triggered exactly the collapse Ardashir had anticipated. Without their emperor, the Parthian nobles had no focal point for resistance. The feudal obligations that had brought them to Hormozdgan had died with Artabanus. What followed was not so much a rout as a dissolution. Individual contingents retreated from the field, seeking to preserve their forces for the inevitable negotiations with the new power in Iran. By nightfall, the plain of Hormozdgan was strewn with the dead of both armies. Casualty figures are impossible to determine with accuracy, but later sources suggest between 10,000 and 15,000 combined losses, staggering for an ancient engagement. More importantly, the political order that had governed Iran since the 3rd century BC had been obliterated in a single afternoon. Ardashir ordered that Artabanus's body be recovered and treated with royal honors. This was not mercy, but political theater. By displaying respect for his defeated predecessor while simultaneously claiming the throne, Ardashir positioned himself as a legitimate successor rather than a usurper. He was not destroying the monarchy, he was restoring it to its proper Persian lineage. Within weeks, Ardashir was crowned King of Kings in the ancient Persian capital of Ctesiphon. The coronation ceremony deliberately echoed Achaemenid precedents, emphasizing continuity with pre-Parthian Persian glory. The new dynasty he founded bore the name Sasanian, after his ancestor Sasan, but its ideology was firmly rooted in the revival of ancient Persian imperial identity. The Battle of Hormozdgan was decisive in a way that few ancient battles achieved. Within 2 years, virtually all former Parthian territories acknowledged Ardashir I as their sovereign. The speed of this consolidation was remarkable, a testament not just to Ardashir's military prowess, but to how thoroughly the Parthian system had been delegitimized. But Ardashir was not content with merely replacing one dynasty with another. He implemented a systematic restructuring of Iranian government that would define the region for centuries. The feudal system of semi-autonomous kingdoms was dismantled. In its place, Ardashir established a centralized administration with provinces governed by appointed officials directly accountable to the throne. The Sasanian Empire would not be a loose confederation, but a unified state. Perhaps more significantly, Ardashir elevated Zoroastrianism to unprecedented prominence as the state religion. While the Parthians had been religiously tolerant to the point of ambiguity, the Sasanians made Zoroastrianism a pillar of imperial ideology. Ardashir patronized the priesthood, commissioned the compilation of religious texts, and positioned himself as the defender of the faith. This fusion of political and religious authority created a powerful legitimizing narrative that would sustain his dynasty through the next 4 centuries. The geopolitical consequences extended far beyond Iran's borders. Rome, which had grown accustomed to dealing with the declining Parthians, now faced a revitalized enemy. Ardashir immediately challenged Roman control of Mesopotamia, initiating conflicts that would define the Eastern Roman frontier for generations. The Sasanian-Roman Wars would become one of history's longest continuous rivalries, lasting until the Arab conquests of the 7th century. Ardashir's transformation of Iran also had profound cultural implications. He initiated an artistic and architectural renaissance that consciously revived Achaemenid motifs while developing distinctive Sasanian styles. The massive rock reliefs he commissioned at sites like Nakshi-Rostam depicted his victories and divine sanction, creating propaganda monuments that still survive today. When Ardashir died around 242 AD, approximately 18 years after his victory at Hormozdgan, he left his son Shapur an empire dramatically stronger than the one he had overthrown. The Sasanian dynasty he founded would rule Iran until 651 AD, becoming Rome's equal on the world stage and creating a distinctive Persian civilization that preserved ancient traditions while innovating in art, science, and governance. The Battle of Hormozdgan represents more than a military engagement. It was the hinge upon which Iranian history turned, the moment when a fragmented collection of feudal territories became a unified empire with global ambitions. Ardashir succeeded not simply because he won a battle, but because he offered a compelling vision of Iranian identity that transcended tribal loyalties and appealed to memories of past glory. Our understanding of Ardashir's rise and the Battle of Hormozdgan comes from multiple sources, though all present interpretive challenges. The most detailed account comes from the Karnamagi Ardashir I, or Book of the Deeds of Ardashir, a Middle Persian text compiled in the early Sasanian period. While clearly propagandistic in nature, it preserves valuable historical kernels about the sequence of Ardashir's conquests. The inscriptions Ardashir himself commissioned, particularly the trilingual text at Naqshi Rostam, written in Middle Persian, Parthian, and Greek, provide contemporary documentation of his claims and achievements. According to Professor Ardashir I of the University of California, Irvine, a leading authority on Sasanian history, these inscriptions are among our most reliable sources for early Sasanian ideology and the legitimizing narratives Ardashir constructed. Later, Islamic historians, particularly Al-Tabari writing in the 9th century, preserved traditions about the Sasanian dynasty that, while transmitted through centuries of oral tradition, contain details not found elsewhere. Cross-referencing these Arabic sources with Armenian historians like Moses of Touraine, who wrote from a non-Iranian perspective, allows us to reconstruct a reasonably accurate outline of events. The archaeological record has also proven invaluable. Numismatic evidence, the coins Ardashir minted showing his evolving titles, charts his progression from regional king to emperor. Excavations at Sasanian sites have revealed the administrative structures he implemented and the architectural ambitions his victories enabled. What emerges from these diverse sources is a portrait of one of history's most consequential figures, a man who was simultaneously a ruthless pragmatist and an ideological visionary. Ardashir understood that military victory alone was insufficient. Lasting power required creating new structures of loyalty, legitimacy, and identity. If you found this story of ancient revolution and imperial rebirth fascinating, there's much more to explore. The Sasanian Empire that Ardashir founded would produce rulers like Shapur I, who captured a Roman emperor in battle, and Khosrow I, whose court became a legendary center of learning. The legacy of this Persian Renaissance influenced everything from Byzantine politics to Islamic civilization. The question Ardashir answered on that battlefield in 224 AD, whether a determined individual can overthrow an established order and reshape civilization itself, remains eternally relevant. From the ruins of one empire, he built another that would challenge Rome, preserve Persian culture through centuries of turbulence, and ultimately pass its traditions to the Islamic dynasties that followed.